we're human beings, and we go through these situations, and we can either do it judgmentally or we can do it, with love in our hearts and inclusively. It's a person's choice. I've just chosen to take the love path.
Welcome to the Showcast, a show about music, culture, and Memphis.
As we live into our mission of building community through music,
education,
and diversity,
we look forward to interviewing artists and musicians and hearing about how they are writing their own stories,
building their own communities.
85 years strong, and with a rich history, the Levitt Show has stood the test of time as a beacon of hope in the heart of Memphis. I can actually do that one more time.
This podcast is brought to you by Orion Federal Credit Union, where a big part of us is being a big part of the community. Visit orionfcu.com to see how Orion is redefining banking.
Welcome to the Showcast. This is episode 16, and for today's episode, I spoke with James Macon, also musically known as Jaeti, the Occupy the Show co-founder, artist, and community organizer. We spoke about how Occupy the Show started, community building, and how he navigates the ever-changing landscape of hip-hop. Now, here's our conversation with James. I know you are one of the founders or founding artists for Occupy the Show. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So in 2000, early 2020, sorry, not 2000, 2020, at the onset of the pandemic, and just in the middle of a lot of social unrest, which necessary social unrest, there was some vandalism that took place with the Shell, and there was vandalism going on all over. And I'm not anti vandalism of the establishment when it serves a purpose.
Right.
But I think that this vandalism was not. It didn't really serve the purpose that was intended by the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth. So, I reached out to the Shell. I didn't know Natalie Wilson, who was the executive director. I just reached out to the Shell just to see if there's anything we could do, myself and some of my friends, to just kind of help and to kind of get them through the situation, through those difficult times. Because I look at all the art venues, whether it be music or be visual arts within Memphis, as something that needs to be preserved. And it doesn't really matter what, to me specifically about race or gender. I just think if we have venues that are inclusive, we need to protect those venues and to preserve those venues.
Absolutely.
And so I reached out to see if there's anything I could do or anything myself and my friends could do to help. And Natalie, she was just like, it was crazy because she was like, nobody else has contacted me to check on us and see how we're doing as a staff.
Wow.
And so yeah, I mean, we're human beings. We're just reaching out just to see how everybody's doing. So she said, yeah, I don't know if anything that can be done right now, but let's just stay in contact. So as the pandemic kind of wore on, I just started seeing a lot of my friends who are musicians and artists just not having venues to play, not having gigs, being impacted financially. We obviously lost some friends through the pandemic. And so I decided, is there something that we could do to bring everybody together? I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, but could we create a space that was safe enough, both in the middle of the social unrest and also with the pandemic, where we could bring everybody together and celebrate and even heal through the event? And so we started brainstorming ideas and started thinking about things, and then we brought in Stephanie Chambers, who's another promoter on the scene who does a lot of events. And we landed on it, like, let's do something that kind of flies in the face of the vandalism. Let's call it Occupy the Shell. Like, let's almost make a joke out of what people attempted to do to the Shell.
Wow. I mean, using that as an opportunity to not only bring the community together, but in multiple ways, in the sense of, realizing and bringing awareness to what happened at the Shell in terms of that vandalism, but also bringing together the community in the sense of artists of color and really creating a space for artists, especially during what was really kind of like the height of the pandemic. I mean, I think seeing that opportunity and seizing it is pretty genius. and awesome. And I mean, this year, the second year doing it, I think you all are continuing to carry that torch, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like, just one thing that we have to be, really aware of is that, every city is a city of communities, right? So, there's no one community, right? We have LGBTQ communities, right? We have communities of color, right? We have art communities, right? Would it be the hip hop community or punk rock or whatever it may be. And then even within the visual arts, right? There's communities of artists. And so, when we think about this, there's no holistic Black experience in Memphis or in the Memphis area or in the Mid-South. There's no holistic LGBTQ experience. Right? There's experiences, and the first thing that was important to me was to make sure that we looked at this as an opportunity to bring together the communities, and that really impacts the way we built the lineups as well for the artists that perform in the event, and also the artists that make up the bands, the backing band, and then the other supporting bands. And we wanted to make sure that where the talent existed, that we had representation, whether it be on who makes the flyers, whether it be on what food trucks are presented, whether who hosts the show, who the artists are who perform, who the band is. We want to have representation, even the vendors, right, across the vendor base that represented all the communities as much as could be as possible. And so, I didn't get all of my favorite artists, and Stephanie, who also was curator, didn't get all of her favorite artists, and Natalie had some things she wanted, and she didn't get everything she wanted, but we all came together and to put together something that would represent Memphis as what it is. It's a diverse, it's not a melting pot necessarily. It's kind of like a garden salad, right? And and we wanted to make that very, very clear and put that out far out front. And then secondarily, we wanted to make sure that Black musicians are represented, because when we talk about Memphis soul, it doesn't matter who the face of soul music is, or the face of rock music is. We know where the heart and soul, and where the foundation of rock music, and where the foundation of soul music, and the foundation of R&B is, and that's in the Black community in rural areas, Mississippi and Bolivar, Tennessee, and places that don't show up on the map, right? And so that was our kind of our motivation and our mantra kind of going into it.
Wow. And so, James, have you always been in this sort of space of creating places of inclusivity for musicians and artists, and has building community or communities, as you said, always been a passion, or is this something that kind of you recognized as you did with, kind of beginning Occupy the Shell? You just recognized that there were, some gaps and things that needed to be filled. I'm curious, how did you get into this communities building phase?
Yeah. So I'll say, because I know it's easy for, when people interview or being interviewed and talking about themselves, they can kind of give you all the virtues and none of the vices. But I want to be really transparent that, I had, we all have a journey in life, and I had a journey in life. I was raised in a very strict Christian household. My dad was a preacher, my granddad's pastor, my great granddad's pastor. So it was very, very strict,
Wow.
very regimented. And so, I was kind of raised in an environment which also was patriarchal. And it wasn't, like, for me, it being a male, where obviously it didn't have a toxic influence on me, but there are things that we carry with us from our childhood that are not good, right? And so I didn't come into adulthood with everything figured out and totally inclusive and just good to everybody. I didn't. I stumbled and I bumped my head, and I had to get out in the world. I was a journalist for a few years. So I worked for CBS, worked for CNN, worked for Headline News.
Wow.
And traveling and seeing the world, and seeing the experiences of people, seeing how people are subjugated and hurt through subjugation. People are sectioned off within societies. Being in the Middle East during the Gulf War period, covering conflicts around the world. Then you can kind of see what is the end result. Even talk about the vandalism. What's the end result if if the vandalism completely goes out of control, right? I've been in communities and been in countries where houses there'd be holes, like a whole hole in the wall. Like you go to Kosovo and there's a house with a hole in the wall, and there's people living in the house and they literally have a hole in their wall from a mortar shot or from an explosion, right? And
Wow.
so having experienced that and seeing children walk into school and then walking past tanks, so, I experienced and also saw subjugation of women in the Middle East and, in countries in the Middle East and not having a voice, and communities, LGBTQ communities being subjugated to the point that just in fear for life day and night, right? So, and I know we're not there, but it's not. It doesn't take a huge jump to get there, right? That's what we have to realize, is that
True.
the way we choose to love each other, and the way we choose to share space with each other, and the way we choose to engage and find enjoyment in each other is really, really important to how we do everything else in the world, whether it be economics, whether it be social, whether it be education, whether it be the family structure. It's that the way we choose to love each other impacts all of it. And it definitely impacts the way we create art.
Absolutely. And so, in talking about creating art, as an artist yourself, it seems as though you use themes, or you discuss themes that impact your community. Have you always been an artist, a music artist, or did you feel as though that was the best medium for you to impact, your community?
Yeah, I mean, my family's always been involved in music. My grandmother was a gospel singer. One of my uncles, QC Macon, he actually was a blues singer out of Bolivar, Tennessee. My
Wow.
grandmother's out of Memphis. And so, in our family, there's lots of musicians, lots of singers, and so we always were involved in music. And as a kid, played instruments and sung in the choir. And we're in church, so my dad being a preacher, we're singing and playing music around the house and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was indoctrinated into early. There's lots of musicians in my family too, so there's always kind of music around. But I think for me, being in hip hop was not the best thing because because my family, just generally speaking, didn't really respect it as an art form. When you have people who play live instruments and can sing precisely to notes and key, pitch perfect. The respect for hip hop was not high across in my family. As a matter of fact, my dad at one point had banned me from listening to hip hop. And he took my
Wow.
tapes, and
Oh man.
probably because I was listening to Too Short and Too Live Crew. So that was that didn't go, I think I was 12 or whatever. So that
Oh
didn't go over too
man.
well. That didn't go over too well with pops, but yeah, I used to get into a lot of trouble about music because I was always from I don't think I was like maybe 6 or 7, 8 years old. I was into hip hop, and so I was part of that generation that came from the b-boys and two turntables and a microphone. So yeah, it was tough. Like for me growing up, I wasn't really allowed to be involved in the scene. So I would sneak out. I was rebellious. I was doing all kinds of stuff. And then when my pops passed away, I was 14. He had chronic kidney disease. He passed away from kidney failure. And that was the first time it was obviously really, really sad, but it was the first time I'd ever had any money of my own. And so I was trying to decide what I would do with the money, save it for college or whatever I was going to do. And so I bought a mixer and two turntables with and that was kind of a crazy thing because my mother was like, your dad, but I had to make a choice. And so I bought two turntables, a mixer and a microphone. And I
Wow.
started making mixtapes in high school. And that's what got me started in music.
Want to learn more about how you can support the Levitt Shell and its mission of building community through music, education, and diversity? Head to levittshell.org. You can read up on our 85-year history, check out our schedule of live and virtual events, visit our shell shop to grab all the swag, and find out ways you can participate in our mission, whether that's through donations, volunteering, sponsoring a show, or becoming a member of our Shell Circle. Once again, levittshell.org.
And so, from those mixtapes in high school to now, I have to ask, like, how is that transition? I mean, given that's a totally, well, not totally different time period, but seeing the progression, especially in hip hop,
Yeah.
how do you see yourself continuing to, evolve and fit while still continuing to, push your message and create, that music that you fell in love with?
Yeah. I think that the first thing is that we're all kind of like telling stories. And sometimes we tell them in a narrative structure where it's like, it's trying to start, middle, end, and there's characters and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's just kind of abstract, and it's just kind of emotions or feelings or just kind of time and place. But regardless of whether I came into it was the 80s, I was born in the late 70s, and so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, or as a kid who's growing up today, and they're talking about what's going on in their life. I don't really have any. I mean, I have some criticisms, but I don't have any negative judgments. And let me explain the difference. Is that when we talk about, my father was critical of what I was doing, and he was critical for good reasons. We saw in the 80s the destruction of Black communities through the crack epidemic. So when my father hears a song about crack, or somebody calling women B's and H's, he looks at that is what is destroying our community, and he was right. He wasn't wrong. So his criticisms were not incorrect. What's wrong is the judgments, right? And a judgment is something like, when you hear this, you're going to do X because you heard this. Now you're going to be this kind of person, and that's not necessarily true. It's true in some cases, but it's not generally true. It's not broadly or globally true.
Right.
And so I think it's important for us as people who are living in a place in time, in a moment in time, to understand the narrative and the dialogue of the times. But we also have got to separate the fact from the fiction. So the difference between what I do and I think what other people do is that, what I write is things that I have experienced, things that I know firsthand. So if you listen to my music, you hear stories about stuff that actually happened, or about the way I feel about things that are going on in the world around me. Where I am critical is the manipulation and creation of things that are untrue and unreal, and then selling it as truth or pawning it off as truth, whether it be a politician or whether it be a rapper or whether it be whatever. If you do that, then that's where you kind of cross the line, because if a child listens to Public Enemy, they're going to hear some things that may be disturbing, but those things are true.
Right.
If they listen to some artist who's fabricating this whole thing and it's not really true, they may replicate that behavior, not knowing that they're taking risks that the original documenter did not take, under the assumption that they are sharing the risk, and that's not really true. So that's where where I jump into my kind of critical bag, is because if we really are going to be progenitors of the culture and we care about the culture, we got to care about the people who consume it. And if the consumer of my art is being influenced in a way that leads them down a path that may cause them harm, I have to take some responsibility.
Man, that's a great way of putting it. And I think that distinction is so needed. Man, I'm mentally saving that in my head. That was spot on. And I mean, I think even myself growing up, and especially like I have an older brother, and I say he greatly influenced my musical taste, and him listening to hip hop and seeing how my parents reacted to that, and him having a similar situation where my mom taking one of his CDs, I think it was a Ja Rule CD, after hearing things that he probably shouldn't have been listening to it just because of the language, but him always making the distinction of, just because they're saying this doesn't necessarily mean like this is what he's thinking or is going to do.
Yeah.
But no, I think that distinction now, especially with the progression of music, and I think that's very spot on, super spot on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as consumers of anything, right, we have to identify how much risk we want to take. So I can't jump on the kids and they're talking about taking Xanax or something like that, when I grew up in an era where probably 5 out of 10 songs had some kind of a crack reference in it, right? And we literally lived through like the literal destruction of communities, either through mass incarceration, through the addiction and the whole drug epidemic, through the destruction of families, right? So, and then also, and I'll say this, and some people may argue it, but also the empowerment of law enforcement to create police states within communities. And I mean, when I say empowerment, I mean empowerment through our own communities, that were people who I knew, preachers and pastors and politicians, were calling for more law enforcement in our communities because, of this crack epidemic. So on one side, you've got the community itself saying, we can't manage this. We need more help to manage it. But then also the people who they're bringing in to manage it are also abusing it, and are the people who are, like, in some cases, bringing the drugs into the community, right? So we were kind of almost put into a situation of self-sabotage. And so the music that came out of it reflects that. So we can't, I can't negate the negativity that comes out of even the boom bap era, because man, the boom bap era was riddled with drug dealing and violence and crack. When I was going to parties in the early 90s, there would be shootings at almost every party. It's not even, I don't even see that today. So I think the violence was even worse then. But a lot of folks that came up with me, they've got a certain amount of judgment on the younger generation. But the truth is that our generation was equally probably worse. We're talking about millions of young Black men went into the prison system in our generation. So we've got our own skeletons buried in the backyard that we need to get straight before we pass judgment on the next generation. And that's kind of to your earlier question, like, how do I, kind of transition into this next generation? I transitioned to it with eyes wide open and without that type of judgment, because the reality is that we didn't get it right when we did it. We didn't do it perfectly either. And they're gonna stumble, and they're gonna make some mistakes too, just like they did with the metal and with grunge and with punk, and with jazz and with the blues era before that, and even with gospel, because I have family members who were gospel singers, and when they were on the road on tour, they had issues with alcohol consumption and alcoholism, with drugs, with premarital sex, so we're human beings, and we go through these situations, and we can either do it judgmentally, or we can do it with love in our hearts and inclusively. It's a person's choice, but I've just chosen to take the love path.
I love that. Well, please let our listeners know how they can hear more of your music and stay connected.
Yeah, definitely. So the best way to find me is just Google Jaeti, and it's spelled Jaeti. That's Jaeti. My name is Jaeti, and you can Google me, and when you Google me, I'm the first thing that pops up. You can link into all of my social media, or into my streaming, or into if you want to purchase music or purchase apparel or any other merchandise, it'll take you to all of that. And I would just say I've got a new album coming out. It's actually scheduled for October 15th. Awesome. I don't know if we're going to make the release date because we keep adding more songs, but but it's called Upside Up, Downside Down, and it's really about it's like a movie. It's a art piece there's no singles. It's just an album that literally is cohesive in every way. But it's about the dichotomy of human nature, the positives and the correlating negatives, and it's about my vices and my own virtues, and just being totally transparent with my listeners.
Wow. Well, we're excited to listen, and we'll be on the lookout for Upside Up, Downside Down. Thank you so much for chatting with us on the Showcast.
Thanks, McKenzii. I sure appreciate it.
Oh, man, it was my pleasure.
That's episode 16 of the Showcast. Thanks again to James Macon. To hear more of his music and stay connected, visit jaeti.bandcamp.com, and that's Jaeti. Make sure you subscribe to hear all of our episodes. To keep our tradition of passing around the tip bucket, which started in 1936, please feel free to drop a small gift at levittshell.org/virtualbucket to support the Levitt Shell. Thanks again, and be sure to tune in for our next episode of the Showcast.